Hello and welcome to the Trump 100 Q&A, the question and answer. I'm James Matthews.
And I'm David Blevins.
Good to see you, David. You've been here, a couple of months on attachment?
I've been here about 4 months of the last 12 in total.
We go back a long way, you and me. At Sky, I started in November 95. When did you start?
February 96.
So what's that between us?
58 years. A long time.
A double life sentence. Yeah.
They should have released us for good behaviour long ago.
Well, I'm not sure about that. But yeah, it's the Trump 100 Q&A. It's not spot the difference with my doppelganger. But yeah, we've got questions that you've sent in. We will endeavour to get through as many of them as we can. David.
Yes, lots of questions coming in over the past week. Amanda asks, can I ask you what's the chances of the war in Ukraine spilling out to other European countries? Do we need to worry as a country?
Well, I think we do need to worry as a country. Good question, Amanda. As a NATO country, NATO is clearly involved in an undefined way, an uncertain way in terms of what comes next. What is the extent of NATO involvement? British troops, where will they be placed? And who, crucially, will have their back? Typically, it would be the United States. It would have been 6 weeks ago. But now, that's clearly up in the air. In terms of countries vulnerable, countries in the vicinity, Moldova, Georgia, it's got a pro-Russian government right now, but a growing, burgeoning democracy movement. If that starts to find a voice that troubles Moscow, I can see movement there by Putin. The Baltic states are vulnerable. Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. Estonia and Latvia have big Russian minorities. Wouldn't be hard for Putin to do what he did in Ukraine and indeed in Georgia, to create a situation where one day you wake up and you have Russian troops, albeit not in military garb on the streets, but essentially seizing territory and power by stealth. I was listening to our colleague Michael Clark, who was good on this, talking about how Putin has always said that Baltic states are part of Russia's natural empire, and he doesn't recognize their sovereignty. Michael reckoned that Putin might well use one of these Baltic states as a rangefinder, a NATO rangefinder, launch some kind of attack, test NATO's willingness to invoke Article 5 to come to the defence of a fellow nation. And if he sees what he wants, i.e. Kind of minimal comeback, then that would be a recipe for a further emboldened Putin, who might take his territorial ambitions further. Interestingly, David, I've got a pal in Moldova. I mentioned this incidentally. This business of USAID being scrapped. One of the programs in Moldova was to fund Western-facing media organizations. Of course, with USAID being scrapped, suddenly they don't have these news outlets in Moldova, or fewer of them, and so they're getting more Russian-based traffic, which I found interesting. It's all part of the bigger picture, but a significant part, I think.
Hugely significant. And still on Ukraine, Peter eBay, it's a great name, I don't know if that's his name or he's trying to flog us something.
No way, Peter eBay.
Has emailed,
sorry if that is your name.
has emailed to ask, how can Trump be considered to be an impartial and balanced negotiator when he cancels military aid and sharing of intelligence with Ukraine, especially as he continues to allow Russia to strike indiscriminately without any comment or action?
Yeah, good question, Peter. A very fair question. That question of balance, negotiating a path through world politics that balances the benefit for all, that pays due attention to world peace, the principles and the politics that have underpinned world peace for 80 years. Donald Trump isn't a man who does mutual interest well. Through time, mutual interest has been imbalanced by his self-interest, this businessman. I think that's why there's such concern that there is this reshaping of the world order driven by Donald Trump, not necessarily driven by a due regard for anybody else. It's why you have Europe scrambling to look beyond its dependence on America, because Trump's America is not the America they have known, loved and lent on through the years. Question for you, David. John asks, why is it so important for Trump to do a mineral deal before he can start peace negotiations. And similar to that, David Purcell asks about the mineral deal. Do you think that President Trump is really interested in ending the war, or is his main objective to sign this minerals deal? What do you think, David?
We've talked so much about rare earth minerals. And, you know, it reminds me of people who say, I don't know why I studied trigonometry, I'll never have to use it again. I don't know why I studied Shakespeare, I'll never read it again. Who knew?
This is their time.
Who knew we would be leaning back into geography and science classes that we took many moons ago to talk about rare earth minerals? But obviously it is hugely about the money for Donald Trump. He has wrongly claimed repeatedly that America contributed $350 billion in military aid to Ukraine. Realistically, it's more like $175 billion. And he also repeats the incorrect claim that it was given in contrast to the European money coming in alone. Again, that's not right. But it is about the money, I think, first and foremost, but it is also about leverage and sequencing, because he is a businessman. If he manages to secure a ceasefire first, there's less motivation for Ukraine to actually do the deal, to surrender something that is so valuable to it. And also, if he does the deal first with Ukraine, then you could argue there's less reason for Vladimir Zelensky to want to enter into a ceasefire and not push on with the deal. But ultimately, whatever his approach is, Donald Trump seems to be really confident about this. Just yesterday, he said he would go to Saudi Arabia within the next month to 6 weeks. He's not going there unless he thinks a deal can be done. And even in confirming that, he talked about how much Saudi Arabia is investing in the United States. So it's almost like the more you pay, the more likely you are to have the opportunity to host the peace talks. So it's very much about money.
Yeah, and the minerals deal as well. You know, the territory that Putin has taken so far, I mean, that is rich in rare earth minerals. And of course, Trump has been speaking to Putin. The Americans and Russians are talking about potentially doing a deal there. So, yeah, I mean, that's not an insignificant complication. Who owns that land? You know, who has the right to negotiate for that? And of course, you've got Zelensky negotiating a deal on one hand, who sees Trump speaking to Putin possibly about this separate deal, a rival deal. And, you know, who would trust Putin, or indeed Trump, not to double deal on this particular score? One of the uncertainties surrounding talks, negotiations, and the Americans' approach to all of this. And of course, the security guarantee is tied in or not tied in, which is part of the problem, isn't it? The Brits, the Europeans, the Ukrainians, they want a security guarantee to come with this minerals deal. And Trump, he's kind of saying, well, we'd have an investment, we'd have a stake, therefore that would be security. Thereafter, what does that mean? You know, nobody knows what that means. Is it private contractors shuttling between five-star hotels and titanium mines? You know, then because they're American, that's somehow going to pin down the safety of Ukraine, of British troops acting as peacemakers.
Yeah, drill baby drill has become dig baby dig.
Yeah.
But I suppose the only person who seems to be content that that is an adequate security guarantee is Donald Trump himself. It's not enough for Zelensky, and it's clearly not enough for either Keir Starmer or Emmanuel Macron either.
Yeah. And Zelensky is being asked to sign this deal blind, isn't he? More questions on that theme, actually, David. Bobby Bren asks, why isn't Europe claiming mineral rights in Ukraine? And on the finance, Louise Simpson says, she actually says, Dear Mark Stone, James Matthews, and holidaying Martha Kellner. Hi, Martha, if you're watching from some exotic beach. But David, you're Martha Kellner for now. Could Europe help to finance its own needs to increase defence spending against Russian expansion by taking the place of the US with a rare minerals deal of its own with Ukraine? More simply put, if the US stood to gain financially from this deal, why can't Europe do the same?
Well, Donald Trump sees the dollar sign. Some people see pound or euro signs clearly in those questions. Very good questions. But the short answer is there's no reason actually, and there have been moves in that direction in the past. 2021, just before the war started, Ukraine and the EU signed a strategic partnership on raw materials, and the aim was to integrate them into the EU supply chain so that Europe would become less dependent on countries like China. So any deal, whether it was done with America or done with Europe, is going to depend on security. Dramatically improved infrastructure in the wake of the war, and regulatory alignment with EU standards, a conversation we've had many times because of Brexit.
Well, you're the man for that, David.
But now that Donald Trump has indicated his desire for a deal, is Europe really going to enter a bidding war with him over what he sees as a piece of real estate, effectively, at this moment of time, this moment of history? I don't think so.
No, I'm with you on that.
So, talking about money, let's stick with tariffs, or let's segue to tariffs.
Very smooth, David.
A question from Batesy Boy 01. In what way did Trump honestly think that he could raise tariffs without rowing back and making himself look a financial failure?
Yeah, well, it's messy, isn't it, right now? We seem to flip-flop, play this daily game of tariff whiplash.
To tariff or not to tariff?
That is the question.
Shakespeare back in again today. We're doing well
you,
about Shakespeare.
You student of all of that stuff. Tariffs have been a core part of American trade policy for centuries. And they can be a successful tool, used correctly in terms of protecting industry, reducing deficit, generating revenue. Trump, of course, it's the word he says that he loves. And it's a slogan that took him a long way throughout the campaign. He framed it as an example of where America was being ripped off, or a solution to America being ripped off. He shouted tariff. The crowd heard, injustice, people taking advantage of the United States. So that worked for him. But of course, economists all the time were screaming, hang on a minute, you realise that tariff actually is a tax, and it's going to be the American consumer who ends up paying. And this week, not only do we see the stock market falling, which is a concern for him, that will worry him, but we also see people like Target, which is our kind of Woolworths over here, saying we're going to have to put up our prices because of this. So, stuff's getting real. It's actually starting to affect real people. Which clearly is a concern for him because Trump was elected to bring prices down. What you hear from Team Trump, it's all about the values they see of tariffs. They talk about it as a negotiating tool to lure manufacturers to the United States, which, to be fair, we have seen that happen to a small degree. So I think time will tell about, in terms of cross-the-board tariffs, whether they are a successful tool, whether or not this sledgehammer actually is the correct weapon of choice.
We may come back to some of the questions around Ukraine and Russia, but now that we've moved to Donald Trump's decision-making on tariffs, let me ask you about Greenland, because that's been back in the headlines again this week. Trump says he will take Greenland one way or another. How is that possible without force? Surely Greenland will not just hand it over.
And we've seen a lot of coverage, haven't we, of Greenland, people of Greenland saying, look, butt out, this place is not for sale. It's a Danish territory, of course, self-governed by a Greenlandic government. Both say, forget it, it's simply not going to happen. Greenland actually wants independence from Denmark, but it very much does not want to be part of the United States. As things stand, this business of could force be used, clearly that is a possibility, but very extremely distant. I think for now it's a campaign of pressure, isn't it? We see that from Trump. He could increase the economic coercion. He's threatened to impose tariffs on Denmark. So we'll see. We'll see how that pans out, but he's certainly not letting it go. In his joint address to Congress, as you pointed out, Dino, he said that we'll get Greenland one way or the other. Interestingly, there is a precedent of sorts. During World War I, the Danish government transferred the Danish West Indies to the United States, now known as the US Virgin Islands. I googled it. I wouldn't have known that. It cost them $25 million in gold coins at the time, which is something like $650 million these days.
I think it is worth reflecting on where he first made the suggestion that he would take Greenland. 2 weeks before inauguration, a press conference at Mar-a-Lago, where he said, I'm going to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Everyone rolled their eyes, but he's done it. He said he was going to put pressure on European countries to up their defence spending as part of NATO, but he's done it.
Yeah.
So that's why you can never absolutely rule it out.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that was last week. Who knows what it will be this time next week? What will be called? Question for you, David, I think, on Trump and the future. Jacob wants to know, is there any sign of buyer's remorse among Trump voters with all this chaos and the fact the American people have always supported the Ukrainian cause?
Not as much as you would expect. We've had some objection from people at what is described as town hall gatherings here when they get to meet with their local House representative or senator and express their views. They've been particularly distressed about the cuts to federal government imposed by Elon Musk, and they've been videoing some of those meetings and posting them online, to the point where we understand members of the House and Senate on the Republican side are being advised not to hold those town halls because, of course, the Trump administration don't want that message going out. But they've been surprisingly loyal, and perhaps it is because of fear, because Elon Musk has clearly indicated that he will fund those who would run against them if they're not loyal enough to Trump. But you have to wonder at some point, does someone step up and say, I'm not comfortable with the direction of travel? Not much sign of that so far.
Yeah, we'll see.
And we've also, on the same line, people are asking where the Democrats stand in all of this.
That's a very good question. And we got a sense of where they are during Trump's joint address to Congress, didn't we? Messy. You had them seated. You had some who didn't attend in objection. You had the signs, the dissent, the representative being thrown out. And I think that actually is the Democrats in microcosm right now. They don't know quite, a party that has been divided, doesn't know quite how to play this president, doesn't have quite the direction yet. I mean, I think the Democrats largely, generally, they need a unity and a message that lands with American voters in a way that it didn't last November. They didn't have the message, didn't have the messenger, actually. So for them, they need a sense of direction. I mean, right now, it's chaos. We are drinking from a fire hose, so to try to get a handle on the politics of Donald Trump is difficult enough without trying to get a firm handle on how to tackle the politics of Donald Trump's. But they need to reconfigure the Democrats, I think, party principle and on policy. And of course, in time, if Trump's policies do actually, if they are seen to work, then that's a reshaping, a recalibration of what the Democratic Party is because of where American politics have been taken.
And I think it was so visually obvious during the address to Congress, where you had not just such an obvious division in the House between Republicans and Democrats, but even among Democrats, some of them boycotting it, some of them there, some of them walking out, some of them shouting, some of them remaining silent. They were all over the place. We have a question. In fact, we've lots of questions on JD Vance. Michelle asks this, is JD Vance the next Republican presidential candidate in waiting? Is there anyone else emerging? I think we might have more than that. And Chris wants to know, how do you think Trump will handle Vance in the future, especially post-midterms, when Vance wants to spread his wings in preparation for the elections, potentially stealing Trump's limelight?
Yeah, well, that would be his big mistake, wouldn't it? Certainly right now. Michelle, I think Vance would like to see himself as the next, as the heir apparent. I think that's why we've largely seen him projecting himself in recent days. We have this cast of characters who are achieving some early results, certainly, around in the Trump inner circle. Vance was receding somewhat, but he has kind of come back with a bang. We saw him in the Oval Office with Zelensky. We saw the Munich speech. Whatever you think of his performance on both counts, he's certainly asserting himself and giving himself a profile which is all important in Trump world. In terms of the interaction with Trump, I don't think right now Trump sees Vance as a threat. I mean, he is a relative relatively a kind of powerless understudy for now. I think he's pretty charmless, lacks charisma. Although it is fair to say that he's more intelligent than Trump. If his trouble would be, and the mistake would be, certainly in the short term, if he was seen to overtake Trump on popularity, outshine him, then I think we'd see Trump, as he has done through time, humiliate Vance, undermine him, throw him under the bus. And I think that'll apply over the next 4 years.
He talked about free speech in Munich and was rebuked by Keir Starmer politely in the Oval Office, certainly more politely than his engagement with Volodymyr Zelensky the following day.
Yeah.
He also referred to the UK and France as random countries with 20,000 troops who hadn't fought a war in the last 30 to 40 years. Does anyone here consider him a liability, do you think, because of that approach?
The thing about the kind of media ecosystem here, David, is that interview on Fox where he casually dissed, allied countries, didn't name them, but he's talking about, clearly Britain and France were in the frame. That was aired on Fox, and that is seen largely by a kind of right-wing or a right-leaning audience. The liberal leaning audience are actually watching the other side of a very partisan media here. So, he was playing to a home crowd, which has to benefit him. He caught a cold, of course, when that became news for us, and the questions were asked by us. What do you mean? What do you mean we're some random country? You forget the history, clearly, that we've done a lot together and done a lot for you. So I think that was that. The interesting thing about Vance is, I think, bigger picture. Vance, very much a man who was lined up by kind of tech bros, MAGA stalwarts, that sort of holy trinity. Steve Bannon, Don Jr., the son of Trump, was in there, but also Elon Musk. He was lobbying hard for JD Vance. Vance is also, he's big buddies with a man by the name of David Sachs, big money, big donor to the Trump cause. I think with these very powerful, influential voices, I do think towards the end of the Trump term, the question is, well, how do they then place Vance? What do they want from placing Vance where he is now? What do they want from Vance towards the end of the Trump term? What's their bigger agenda, given the power that they clearly have and this proximity to office that they have bought for themselves? I've got a question for you, David. It's from Peter Willard. When I think of Donald Trump, hang on, this is the fun question. When I think of Trump, I often think of the Danny DeVito character in the Christmas movie Deck the Halls. DeVito is a very successful second-hand car salesman, a real deal maker, a showman who likes to make a quick deal, get the money and move on. But he also wants to leave a lasting legacy, in his case being able to see his Christmas lights from an Earth-circling satellite. I'm just thinking, David, before I get to the nub of this question, I can just see Donald Trump looking at the two of us, thinking, hang on a minute, we've got a question about... I'm watching these two, and it's me who's being compared to Danny DeVito. Anyway, the question is, what fictional character springs to mind when you think of Donald Trump?
I'll give you a clue. Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore.
So the film is
The Wizard of Oz.
The Wizard of Oz.
And I say that for three reasons. It's repeated more than any other film. Donald Trump's on television a lot. I say it also because the main characters, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Lion, they placed great faith in the Wizard. And, a lot of people...
Not the hairstyle, is it?
No, not the hairstyle. A lot of people are placing faith in Donald Trump. And we're going to have to wait to the end of the 4 years, arguably, for the curtain to be pulled back and to find out whether their dream comes true. And also because he operates so far beyond the parameters of politics as we've known them, so far beyond America as we've known it, that every time he says something or does something, literally, you think, we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto.
Yeah, well, very good. I think, when I think Trump, you've got the hair very much combed sideways, you've got the fake tan, you've got the good wardrobe. I would liken him to Gemma Collins. Well, that's what I think. I think where are we now? I think we're almost at the end. David, thank you. It's been
My pleasure.
Great, always great to see you. Thanks for doing this. We'll see you again on the on Trump 100. Yeah.
I suspect you might.
Well, you're here for a while, so cheers. And thank you. Many thanks for all your questions. Do follow us on the podcast Trump 100 and send your questions for next week's episode. The email address is trump100, that's trump100 @sky.uk. Many thanks for watching.